Hey everybody, I hope that you're all having a great week. I just wanted to check in quickly about what's going on next week with Module 5. As we're finishing up our blogs on Rachel St. John's Line in the Sand this week, um, I'm excited to read about your final reflections on that book, including the notion of the extent to which it's a transnational study. I think it is, in that it includes information perspectives from both sides of the border um, in terms of how the border was created. It looks at of course, the binational boundary commission with Emory and Bartlett and all of those folks, as well as their Mexican counterparts. It looks at Pesquera's initiatives in the decades following the initial formation of the border relative to resisting filibustering and that kind of thing. So um, it does look at information from both sides of the border, but not necessarily in equal weight. And so something to think about as we continue our studies, and after we do Module 5, where you'll be proposing your ideas for the final project, we will turn to Julian Lim's book, and then after that we'll read, I'm forgetting her name right now, Migra, um, Kelly Little Hernandez. We'll be looking at studies that don't necessarily need to be transnational, but perhaps may be more evenly weighted as transnational histories in St. John's. So see if you make sense of what I'm trying to mean by that as we read those books. So that's a thread that I just want us to keep talking about as we continue our studies. Thinking then about the final projects, I've proposed those as either a story map or as a timeline. I do encourage you to use the digital platforms that I have suggested in the instructions for the final project. Please read those over and let me know what questions you have as we round out Module 4.2 and as we get into Module 5. You will need to have a preliminary working bibliography by the end of Module 5. So when you submit your proposal for the project, you will submit the kind of topic that you'll be looking at. So you could look at any range of things relative to the US-Mexico border from its inception to the present. And depending on what you do, it might make more sense to have a story map, which has more of a geographical focus, versus a timeline, which of course has a temporal focus. So if you're looking at a historical development change over time, the timeline, of course, will make more sense. If you're looking at different regions within the border, if your question, for example, has to do with border towns as quote-unquote dens of vice, especially during Prohibition and the Depression era, then you might want to use the story map. So again, think those things through. As with everything in the class, I don't want the project to be primarily about learning to use a new tool, a new digital tool. You know, I've chosen platforms that I think are relatively intuitive and that will allow us to use their timeline building ability as well as the geographical, spatial recognition kinds of ability in those to leverage and make stronger final projects that will be yours to keep, that are shareable, and so on. If, though, you find that the platforms themselves are kind of bogging you down, please let me know and we can have a conversation about that via email and decide maybe there's an alternative platform that would be better. So the whole point of that is don't get discouraged if you think that the platforms seem a little daunting. I will help you along the way, and we can formulate what the project needs to look like as we go, depending on what you want to study. So again, we do have the focus on the US-Mexico border. If you wanted to do a comparative with another border, that is a possibility, as long as the US-Mexico border is part of it. But again, within that, you can focus on whichever kind of perspective, angle, issue, and so on that you want to study in more depth for the final project. Again, please let me know what questions you have about that, and I look forward to getting all of your proposals for the project in the next week and a half or so.